When I first went to university, which is, well, many years ago now, only 5% of the people who left school went to university. Now, it's about almost 50%. I think it's about 45% of people now go from school to university in some kind of higher education. And it's very costly to do that as well. It costs a lot of money to be able to go to university these days. When I went, I had the great advantage of getting a grant. So they paid for all my accommodation, they paid for my fees, and I didn't have any debts after it. These days, well, you know, the situation is much more difficult with that. And I suppose you leave at the end of your 3 years or so for an undergraduate degree, often with a debt of £50,000 or even more than that. And that makes it very difficult for people, and it makes it also a very important question like, should I actually go? Should I go to university, and should I undertake this kind of higher education? And what's in it for me? What's the real advantage? I've thought about this for some time, and I often think that what is the advantage of going to university? What is the purpose of it? And I think that for many people, it's no more than simply getting a qualification so they can get a good job and get a higher salary, often though it's offset by the debt which they've accumulated. But it seems to me that there's the real reason for going to university, the real purpose behind it, is really to not just simply educate yourself, but move into that area of maturity which I think only that stage of education can give you. You know, as lecturers, we tend to think that maybe we're doing a lot of work here, giving you a lot of knowledge about computing, or giving you knowledge about physics, or giving you knowledge about geography. And that's the real reason why you come to university, in order to get that knowledge that you're going to feed to you, and give some examples of doing that. But you know what? I've come to the conclusion that although we, as I say, lecturers might think that that's the real benefit of coming to university, you know what? I don't think it is. And I think that we overinflate our role in the educational process. My personal view is that the real benefit of going to a university and getting a university education is not actually found in the lecture room. It's not found in the seminars where you work together. No, where it's really found, I think, is in that incredible challenge and journey that you make, where you have to leave home for the first time, often at the age of 18, where you've never had to look after yourself because mum and dad have looked after you. And you've got to go to a place that you don't know. You've got to meet with people you've never met before. You've got to find yourself in an environment that you've never experienced before. And you've got to make something of yourself in there. You've got to learn to do basic things like getting your own food, and when are you going to eat, and when are you going to go to bed, and when are you going to wash your clothes and stuff like that. How are you going to find yourself around? And even more importantly, how are you going to make so many new friends when you know nobody? I mean, this is a real challenge. The uprooting of a person at a very formative age, transporting them into a place they know nothing about, placing them into a chaotic situation where they've got to learn to make friends, where they've got to learn to cope with whole new systems, learn them rapidly and quickly, and come out on top of that. Now that, it seems to me, is where the real benefit of university education actually lies. It's in the social connections, the overcoming of the challenges, the venturing away from everything that's comfortable, everything that you know, everything that you leave behind in order to make your way in the world. And you know, the leap of learning and maturity that engenders is just vast, and it dwarfs everything else that you learn at university. Seems to me that very often the subject matter, the contents of what you learn, the computing databases, the programming skills, they're all peripheral to the main event. And the main event is a life-changing, life-reorientating, life-challenging event, where suddenly you've got to go from a child who's being looked after to an adult who looks after themselves. And that, it seems to me, is where the real learning takes place, where you really learn the most important lessons in life. And that's why moving away from home, I think, is an integral part of that. Many people can't afford to move away from home these days because the fees are so high, and that's a great shame. Because it means that you're probably still living with mum and dad, and they're still doing the cooking for you, and they're still looking after you, and still keeping an eye on you. But those who are managed to leave home, to move away, it's a massive break. Remember when I first did it, the first week was difficult. I didn't know what to do. I sat in a hall of residence, and I thought to myself, what do I do now? Because up until then, people had told me what to do. Now it's time to eat. Now it's time to go to bed. Now it's time you can go out to the library. Now you can do this. But now you run everything for yourself. And that's a massive learning exercise. I think that is the real value of going to university these days. You can take a similar kind of view if you go on a trip around the world or something, as they used to do in the Grand Tour. That takes even more money, though, sometimes. But I would urge you, therefore, that it's a challenge. It's but an important step, a milestone in life. And it's one which is not easy to grapple with, but it's one where you learn the most lessons, where you begin to meet the challenges of life, where you begin to see that there are things which you can do which you never thought you could do. There are people that you can meet that you never thought you could meet. There are friendships that you can make that you never thought you could make. And when you look back on those times, you think, gosh, I learned a lot, and I even grew a lot, and I became confident in myself and my abilities for the first time. And that, it seems to me, is the real benefit of a university education.